Hello, everybody. I want to welcome you to our first Simple 7 interview for the Center for Teaching Through Children's Books. In this interview, we're going to be asking 7 simple questions: why, when, who, how, what, where, and do. And I am here with the amazing John Francis, author of Human Kindness, a book by What on Earth Books. And I'm just so excited. But before we get started listening to me ask questions, I think we're going to have some wonderful music first. So please.
Okay.
What a great way to start an interview.
Yeah.
Thank you. I love that.
You're welcome.
Oh, that was wonderful. And what a great way to ask the first question. Why did you decide to write Human Kindness?
Wow. That is such a great question.
It's a big one.
And it is because, I had given up riding in cars after seeing an oil spill. And soon after that, I had actually stopped speaking because I didn't want to argue with everyone and about whether one person could make a difference. And so I picked up the banjo, and that was my way of communicating, along with painting and writing. And so those are the 3 things: painting, writing, and music, which allowed me to communicate with people while I didn't speak. And of course, I use signs and mime and acting out. So my main communication was just being who I am and just being in my body. And that was it. And that was a wonderful thing for me, because I used to talk so much and I used to not really think about what people were saying to me. I was so lucky and so fortunate because people were so kind to me on my journey across the country that I realized that kindness has to be an important part of who we are. Now, I studied at universities at different places. I went to school and I read lots of books on the environment because, that's why I was actually walking after seeing an oil spill. But I never heard in all of my studying that people, being kind to people, was an important part of being an environmental activist or an environmentalist. But what I discovered was that if people were part of the environment, then how we treated each other was really our first chance to treat the environment in a sustainable way, or even understand what we mean by sustainability. And so environment to me became about human rights and economic equity and gender equality and all the ways that we relate to each other as people. And don't you know, kindness is a very important part about how we relate to each other. Kindness is kind of the sauce or the lubricant that helps us be together. And so I realized that I was going to have to write a book about that. My first book, Planetwalker, was a general book for everybody. But I realized soon after writing that book that, you know, I had to write a children's book. I had to write something that would reach me when I was you. and so I had a good friend. His name was Christopher Lloyd, and he was a publisher of What on Earth's books. And we had spent some time together on a sailing ship, sailing around the world to commemorate Charles Darwin's birth. And on that voyage, Chris and I became such good friends, and he realized that if he ever became a publisher, he was going to ask me to write this book on kindness, and he did.
Well, I know Chris a little bit, and he has an instinct for the stories that need to be told, and I can absolutely see him, all the light bulbs going off above his head for this one. And this book is not just for the readers, it's also a wonderful resource that teachers, educators, librarians, literacy people, anybody, guardians, can pull information out to share with even very young children,
Yes.
who aren't necessarily ready to read it for themselves. So, you know, I think this is not just a book to read, but a resource to build it. And I, for one, thank you.
Oh, you're welcome.
Very deeply. So at what point, I mean, was it during that, the trip with Christopher Lloyd, that you realized you wanted to tell this story of kindness to children? I mean, was this something that you had thought about before speaking with him?
Well, I think actually on this trip, we talked about it because I had already written a book, and I was thinking about writing a children's book. And so I probably mentioned that to Chris at the time, and he put that somewhere, and you know, so sooner or later he was going to ask me to he got into the position where he could publish a book by me. So that's how that happened.
So you already had the little seed ready to grow, yeah. And you just shared it with Chris, and here we are. And not necessarily just in creating the book, but I think also in the larger scope, because without your experiences, without those 17 years of silence spent listening and modeling and embodying kindness and empathy, I'm going to ask you, who inspired you the most?
Well, you know, it's I think that's a hard question. As I said in the book, which is I think just the beginning of the book, my parents were my inspiration, especially my mother and her mother. You know, there were just in the way that they lived life and what they shared with me was enough to get the message that kindness and generosity were really important. No matter who you were, no matter how much you had, or didn't have, no matter your circumstances, you can always be kind, you can always share what you have, and you can always be a generous person.
And that was really apparent in in the book. You have this timeline of
yes.
path, the path, which for me, I immediately saw the path you walked as embodied in this path. literally, they guided you and were examples to you in a lot of different really concrete ways of giving back to their community, of giving back to others. You know, they planted that original seed in your experiences as a young child.
Yeah, yes, they did. You know,
And
and so, like I said, my mother, for example, her grandmother, the people that were alive that I could see, also there was a line of my relatives, and I could see that they were all like that. And you know, some to some degree, some were more than others. But my mother was, I think, the light in my life, the shining example for me.
and it speaks also to a little bit of what we do as opposed to what we say, because you know, the things that you describe are very active things, and you could have just observing her and walking with her and being with her during some of the things she did, taking gifts, you know, food baskets and gift baskets to people, so many things that are mentioned here.
Yes,
Speaking to
yes.
when you decided to stop speaking, it was what you did that resonated with people, and you didn't have to use the words.
That's true.
And in being
That's
examples for young people, I think we tend to forget as teachers and guardians, they're always watching, and we don't necessarily.
you're absolutely correct, because there's a time as a teacher, my time at university teaching without speaking. I would make all kinds of motions and do kinds of signs, and oh, and my students would interpret what I was saying. And what I learned is sometimes they would interpret exactly what I was saying. And sometimes they were interpreting something a little bit different than what I was saying,
Mhm.
but maybe a little better than what I had actually said. And so I left that experience with the understanding that if you were a teacher and you weren't learning from your students, you probably weren't teaching very well. So I thought that, you know, being a teacher is also being a student, and being a student is also being a teacher, and that we exchange different things at different times to each other, and how important that is for all of us.
Absolutely. It's you know, it was a brilliant way to get your students to talk, because they had to interpret and to share with each other what you were saying gesturally, which ended up being brilliant, and as you said, raised topics that you never would have come across. um, I was fascinated by hearing you talk in some of your TED Talks, and I'll put the links below. You know, that component of your teaching, and the listeners and the viewers might not realize that, if I'm not mistaken, you received your bachelor's degree and your graduate degrees during this 17 years of silence, correct?
Yes.
Yeah.
That was fun. Of course, after each time I said, oh God, that's so hard, I'm never going to do that again. And then I would find myself in another program, and I go, oh gosh, that was so hard, I'm never going to do that again. And then I'm finally getting my PhD, and I just said, I give up, I'll just go along with this.
Yeah. No, I just find that part just amazing to consider. Um, and then you had finished your PhD when you decided to speak again in 1990. So
Yes,
you had gone all the way through to your PhD in silence.
yes, yes.
All I can say is wow.
Yeah,
What
yeah,
a,
it
I
was.
mean, it sounds really, you know, like you can romanticize it, but that must have been an incredible challenge. So
I mean, and you have to think also, while it was an incredible challenge for me, it was also an incredible challenge for the institutions that I learned in, and for my teachers to accept that challenge, to accept, well, you know, this person isn't going to talk, but they still have to do all the work, and you still have to communicate with them, So it was also a very generous and kind, uh, you know, experience for me receiving this from the institution and from each professor that I had.
It's another facet of the kindnesses that you have received along your path.
Yeah.
Very
Yeah.
much so. You know, in the book, you cover different examples of kind people, and that are some well known, some not so much known in countries, depending upon where your readers are. How did you decide upon which stories of kindness to include in the book for your young readers?
Well, you know, I had editors to help me, and I would basically gather all the experiences that I could find, all the examples of kindness, and then we would have discussions with the editors. The editors said, "Well, how about if we just put this one in and we put that in?" And some might say, "Well, you know, I kind of like this one. I really think that one's really important." One of the things that was really important to me, and the editors agreed as well, was that that we don't candy coat, you know, the foibles of humankind. Mm-hmm. That we have, you know, war and racism and all these things that we have to deal with. You know, we have a history of slavery and all of those really very difficult times for us. And sometimes we're still dealing with them. And it shows us that kindness is really so important for our survival. It goes all the way back to, you know, prehistory, pre-written history, where we have archaeologists and are looking at the bones and getting examples of how people must have been kind in order for someone with this disease to survive. You know, so it was a joint effort how we did that. It's working with very astute editors that listened. You know, and
yeah, and we do keep coming back to the power of listening.
Yes,
you know, it's especially important to talk about what you've included in the book and not candy coating it, not omitting it. With the current climate of sometimes not covering things or including things and not reading things or adding things to the curriculum because of how they make people feel about the past and how they view the current world and the future. You know, certainly there's this is a lot to talk about and more than we can talk about here. But were you thinking in terms of, you know, adding these components to get those stories out there when you were including them, the ones that were important to you?
Well, they were, you know, and I did. I mean, those are the conversations I would have with my editors at the publishing house, and you know that this was important. For example, Harriet Tubman, you know, and the Underground Railroad was really important for me as an African American. And actually, there's a museum here in Cape May where I live, a Harriet Tubman Museum, to tell that story, and also to tell that, you know, it wasn't only Harriet Tubman that was kind, but all kinds of people, and they weren't all African Americans. They weren't all Africans. They were, you know, people from all walks of life, and they were Native people. They were white people who had come over for settlers. You know, there were just kindness was not owned by one group of people. You know, it's all of us. It's in all of us, and that's the important part. That's the story I want to tell, and I want to empower, especially children, you know, to understand that kindness isn't a just something that is a weakness, but that is a courageous strength to be kind, especially in the face of what we have happening in the world today, the divisiveness that we have. Just I think that's an important story to understand as well.
And you really did hit a global perspective in the people you chose to show as examples of kindness in a lot of the different areas of this book, very much a global perspective. And I think that's going to be so valuable in how this book can be used and the different places it can be used.
Good.
And strengthening, giving kindness that foundation of strength rather than weakness or other ways that it's been incorrectly portrayed.
Yes.
Excellent part of the book to highlight. Thinking about your young readers, what do you hope, and I think some of this is pretty obvious, but what do you hope they take away after they've read this book? Where do you hope that their thoughts, their actions go?
Well, I'm very hopeful and very excited for the response from the young readers. I would imagine that there are examples of them, but they could go out and discover how they can be kind. And that, someone asked me, well, what's the future of kindness? And I go, as children are our future, children are also the future of kindness. And so I hope that they, use that in their own lives. And if they use that in their own lives, the secret is that it's really affecting all of our lives. And that's what, each person who makes that choice to be kind to someone somewhere in one situation, it affects all of us in all of our situations where we are.
It's very much that ripple effect in action. And
yes, it is.
I think we lose sight of that. You have one of the last sections of the book is kindness close to home, where you are specifically talking to the young readers about ways that they can care for themselves in order to care for others, be kind to themselves in order to be kind to others. And it's a component that I think kindness is always seen as this way. It isn't often portrayed as this way. If you catch my meaning, it's,
yes.
You take care of yourself, you can take care of others. And it echoes some of your earlier, some of the things you said earlier in our discussion about how, you have to keep it close first and empower yourself first so you can help others, so you can reach out to others with kindness.
Yes. Yeah. I think that you want to practice this on yourself first. If you practice it on yourself, you can say, oh, that's good, pretty good. I think I'll practice that around. I'll spread that around a little bit. One of the things that I do for kindness, when I get up in the morning, is I sit silently for a half an hour. Now, I started out sitting, this is after I started speaking, because when I didn't speak, I sat all the time without speaking and listening. But so now in the world that we live in the world when I get on trains and planes and I drive my hybrid car to take my children to school and to work and all those things, each morning before I get up, I say, John, now I want you to sit down and I want you to take a half an hour and I want you to just think about gratitude. Gratitude, yeah, that you got up this morning. You got up this morning. So I would be grateful, and I think of all the things that I'm grateful for, that I'm healthy, that there's a roof over my head, that I can sit here quietly for a half an hour. That's a good thing, that I can dream. And the other thing I like to think about is forgiveness. Well, this is really important because I discovered early on that if we forgive others, we can forgive ourselves. And being angry at someone, it's it really is the anger is really inside you. It says, well, how does that anger make you feel? It makes me feel terrible. Yeah,
Yeah.
it does.
And there's a lot of it around.
Right. So why don't you, can you forgive that person and let that anger go? And now how's that feel? Feels much better. Not having to carry that anger inside.
And I think a lot of people don't know how to do that.
It takes practice. It takes practice. And there's one thing that I don't think I could explain it in this book, but there were people when I started out, they would say to me, John, that's crazy. So people get upset when they see you doing something sometime, you know, like, well, what are you doing? Why are you doing that? You know, and people would ask me, well, John, when people did that to you, did you get angry? And I would say, well, no. I mean, I did. I have to say, at first I did. But then I learned that, wait a minute, that I'm not going to, in fact, I love those people that say things like that because they were giving me the opportunity to practice what it was that I was preaching or what it was that I said I believed. It's really important to have people around you that sometimes question what you're doing so that you can question yourself and so that you can come up with the answer that, no, I think that's right. What I'm doing is the right way I want to be.
It's kind of a strange kind of gift.
Yeah.
When people push a little bit.
Yes, it is.
You know, it does give you the insight and strength.
Yes, you're right.
I get that.
Yeah, some people say, you know, right from the beginning, okay, I'm going to be the devil's advocate. Okay, you can go ahead. Go ahead. I'll listen. Because I had to listen to everything, all kinds of things.
Yeah.
And I would listen to all kinds of things, and some of them were like, gosh, did I really want to hear that? Well, no, I did, but you know, I'm still going to go this way. I'm still believing this way.
Yeah, I mean it. Do you ever miss the silence?
Well, you know, that's a good question. And I'm silent. First of all, I should say after 17 years of not speaking, it's like it just doesn't go away when you start speaking. That place where you are, you know, just doesn't stop. And sitting every morning for at least a half an hour, it really helps to center me, to remind myself of that space and be in that space. So the silence is still there, you know, it hasn't gone away. And I like to remind myself of it and be there whenever I can. So no, I don't miss it. But it was an interesting time in my life. I look at it that way, that to go to school and to communicate that way.
Yeah. I mean, you seem to be valuing and really embracing that, you know, now this form of communication is back in your life. And I'm awfully glad because it would have made our interview and our discussion just a little bit of a challenge, but I would have been up for it.
Yeah.
And happy to do it. But you know, I think people underestimate like just that power of being alone in silence, even for a little bit of time, can make a difference. And I certainly do that as well. So I'm resonating on that. Where are you going to go from here? I mean, with human kindness, with this wonderful book and resource out now, where are you going from here on?
Well, I have another book to write. I think I have a book about walking through South America. And that's, I sailed through the Caribbean. After I walked across the United States, I sailed through the Caribbean and walked through the Amazon and visited the Antarctica and then walked the length of South America. So I have a book there. There is also some movies that I like to write screenplays. I also like to revisit the science of kindness, to make this to expose this as even a research subject, the subject that could be researched, that we could learn more from, because some of our young readers are at some point going to be possibly scientists, and they're going to be adults, and they might want to read some more about kindness. And
so these new projects are aimed for adult readers and viewers. Yes.
Yes, and then hopefully I get to revisit some of my children and young student readers as well.
Well, I would like to just throw a really tiny seed out there that I think a book about silence for children would be amazing to see how you would approach that subject.
Yes.
As then putting on my little teacher hat, that is something that's hard for young people often to imagine, is, that kind of silence and the benefit of being quiet.
Yes.
And not just so the adults can talk over your head, but just embracing that.
Yeah, so mostly so adults can understand it in a way that they need to understand it.
Yeah. So I'm just saying, I would get a bunch of that book.
All right.
So a lot of the people who are going to be watching this are educators and librarians, people who have a deep love of books, guardians, the parents of the readers. Thinking back to when you were a child, do you have any special memories of books or libraries that come to mind that you would share?
Yes, my favorite library and book story is after going to school and during the summer, being challenged to read 10 books over the summer. 10 books, and I would go to the library, our local library, on Germantown Avenue in North Philadelphia. That library branch, I believe, is still there and still open. And taking out books to read over the summer, and then getting my library cards stamped with. Now, you not only had to read those books, but you had to write a little book report. And I got so much out of that. I was so inspired to read books. And I have to say my genre was science fiction. So I was introduced to Isaac Asimov and also Arthur C. Clarke. And that just was opened my world up. I couldn't believe it. So that's my story. I'm sticking to it. And I would like to challenge other students to read those 10 books. Get on that wagon and read those 10 books and write a little report on that, and just think about it. Think about what you're reading and how it's enlightening you. It's opening your world. Oh my.
I love hearing that. And in the strange way, I can kind of see how your love for science fiction, because kind of fueled a lot of the things you did. Because if you had told yourself as a young person, you know, these are the things you're going to do, and you're going to get a PhD, and you're going to do all this learning without speaking, and you're going to be, you know, being somebody who's advocating for all these wonderful changes, for these important changes in the world, without using a word out of your mouth, you would have probably thought that was kind of science fiction. So
yeah.
And I think there's
fantasy.
We're kind of switching genres, but no, it's just really inspiring. And the challenge, I'm sure you're going to have a lot of readers and educators and librarians and parents and guardians who are going to take you up on that challenge. So I'm delighted. And thank you so much for spending time with us today. I'm going to open it up to you now. If there's anything else you'd like to leave us with, or, you know, just discuss, we would love to have you set us off on our way.
Well, I'd like to leave you with the rest of the banjo tune.
Wonderful. We're ready. John, thank you so much.